So Silicon Valley took about 80 years to create. And what's important about Silicon Valley is not everything you see, but what you don't see. It's the culture of this valley that makes this place special. And that culture took a long time, and the self-reinforcement of the right people being here and the wrong people leaving here to eventually create the ethos that makes this place what it is. It's important to understand, of course, coming from outside the valley, you know this. Inventiveness and creativity is not a monopoly of Silicon Valley. It's not what makes Silicon Valley special. Inventiveness and creativeness is wherever there are smart people, and that is everywhere on the planet. What makes Silicon Valley special is the best practice of entrepreneurship. Entrepreneurship as different from innovation or inventiveness. There's a practice of taking great ideas and great concepts to market and having impact. That is a profession. It is not a crapshoot. It is not something that is held to just inventors in the lab. It is called entrepreneurship. And the high watermark of entrepreneurship in this country, and then I would say probably on this planet as a result, is here in Silicon Valley. Why? Why? It's not because of the amount of money that's in the valley. It's not because of the smartness of the people in the valley. That's just a given. What's happened in the valley, what makes this place special, is how it fails, not how it succeeds. The reason this valley is constantly reinventing itself, starting with chips in the 1950s and 60s, moving up through mainframes and then through mini computers, PCs, and the internet and everything you've seen since then. The reason it's been able to do that is not because it has an uncanny ability to succeed, but because it has a great way of failing. This valley has learned not to personalize the failure of the people who try great things. This valley has learned to embrace failure as experience and redeploy it towards success. Now, this is much easier said than done. We could all agree that that's how we want to live our lives, and we could all agree that that's how our business community is going to work, and it doesn't matter if everybody else doesn't agree. And so when I go and speak in places like Germany or in the Netherlands or in Scandinavia, there's still this very big issue of what happens if somebody tries something and fails. You're 23, you're 24, you've got a big idea, you raise some money, you go out, it doesn't work. What I'm told constantly by people, particularly in Europe, is the result is you're out of the game. Nobody's ever going to write you a check again, and you're not even qualified necessarily for a great job. In the Valley, that's not how it works. So how did this start? In the 1930s, the internet of the day, the social web of the day, was radio engineering. And there was a professor at Stanford by the name of Frederick Terman. Frederick Terman was nobody special. Stanford was no place special. All of the great educational institutions in the United States were east of the Mississippi. Stanford was a big land-grant college sitting on a beautiful piece of property, and it had no distinction. And Frederick Terman taught radio engineering. But he had this idea. He had these very clever students, and some of them were the Varian brothers, some of them were Hewlett and Packard. And he had this idea. He'd give them $300-400 in a garage, literally a garage, to try their ideas out and see if they could actually make products from them. That particular seed, planted 30, 70, 80 years ago now, is the seed that gave rise to a relationship between Stanford and the Valley, which is like no other university and its business community on the planet. At Stanford, there's a revolving door between the brains that are constantly doing research and the business community. People like me go in and teach for a few years and then, and on the side, work with entrepreneurs. People inside who are doing great, deep research are encouraged to leave with their research, take it into business, own part of the business, become wealthy, and come back and teach. John Hennessy, who is the president of Stanford, has done 3 startups. He's a very wealthy man. And he has left the university and come back numerous times. That revolving door means that we've got the best and the brightest brains in deep research and in the labs constantly interacting with the business community and vice versa. And so what Fred McTerman started in the 1930s is sort of come to fruition in what we think about as Silicon Valley today. The reality was that Silicon Valley was, until the late 50s, beautiful fruit orchards. You could drive down, well, there wasn't a 280, but you could drive down what is now the highway and just see cherry trees and plum trees and apple trees and apricot trees as far as the eye could see. But smart people started coming here from the west, from the East Coast, so I would say sort of refugees from a more structured environment. They started coming here because they felt like they could pursue their ideas. People like Farnsworth, who essentially invented television. People who came out with chip ideas from Bell Labs because they couldn't do it at Bell Labs. And these became the Intels of the world. And so we became Silicon Valley, and the trees were cut down, and pop-ups came up. And we still had the beautiful sun, and we still had the beautiful landscape, but we were in a different business. Now, what's interesting about Silicon Valley is it's not unusual to have a cluster pop up, a business cluster of entrepreneurship innovation around a successful industry, and have people leave those companies to create smaller companies to replicate them. It's not unusual. That's what happened in Boston in the 1950s and 60s as you moved from mainframes to minis, and you ended up with this cluster called 128, which was more powerful than Silicon Valley in the 1960s. But what was unusual about Silicon Valley is it wasn't about one cluster. It was about a way of thinking. And so we moved very seamlessly from chips to computers, and from computers to personal technology, and from personal technology to software, and from software to communications, and from communications to the internet, and from the internet to entertainment, and from entertainment to a world in which we live now where we've got biotech, green tech, and the green tech story is an interesting story because 5 years ago there was basically no green tech in this valley. And when my firm and other firms decided that green tech was an important area to invest in, we went out to the rest of the world to figure out who the best and the brightest were there. We actually thought we were going to have to reinvent our business and start to put offices outside Silicon Valley en masse in order to deal with clean tech innovation where it was. Even in the United States, it tended to be in the middle of the United States at smaller colleges that had been working in ecology and agriculture for a long time. But in Silicon Valley's inimitable way, we sucked them back here. And we didn't suck them back here because we told them they had to come here. They came here because they came to this environment and they said, this is the place where I can create. This is what I've been missing. Like-minded people, supportive of my willingness to take risks, and willing to help me harness my failures into success. So when people take me to their Silicon Valley, wherever I go, whether it's China or India or Spain or wherever I go, they take me to their quote-unquote Silicon Valley. You see something that looks just like this place. It's always the most beautiful place in the country. Plenty of sunshine, beautiful tilt-up buildings everywhere, open structures inside, no closed offices, ping pong tables and all sorts of things for people to amuse themselves inside, broadband coming in, people writing checks. but they're not working. They're not working because they're missing that one thing that you don't see. A culture that embraces failure towards success. If you're a scientist in a lab, you understand very, very clearly that for you to succeed, you're going to have to fail first. The story on Edison and a light bulb is that he tried 999 different filaments before he came up with a tungsten filament that worked. I don't know if that's true or not, but it creates the mythos about what innovation is. Innovation isn't that eureka idea that you walk out with and immediately it works. It's the idea that you have to methodically test and try until you finally get to the right answer. Now, there's a great side benefit that comes from having this culture and attracting the best and brightest in the world. And that is the learning cycle in Silicon Valley now is incredibly quick. So for instance, when we bring interesting people from places in Europe and in Asia, South America here, who are working on very similar ideas to ideas that you may see up here, when they spend a couple of months here, they realize that the speed at which those ideas are moving up here are going to put them out of business before they can be in business. And they move. A lot of business in Silicon Valley takes place in coffee houses. It takes place in bars. It takes place at parties where people mingle and share information pretty freely. In spite of all this intellectual property litigation you see going on around here and the patents that are being thrown at between Google and Apple and Microsoft, when it comes to the engineers doing the work, the entrepreneurs with the ideas, they share them very, very freely. And so the learning cycle means that there's this rushed dynamic, this very, very quick, swift movement of innovation to encompass the ideas that are out there, move them forward, throw out the ones that don't work, and keep going. It makes my job actually very, very hard. It's very often what I'll see is somebody will come up with an interesting new angle on a product or a service. And within a month, I will see 10 just like it. And they will be separated by the smallest nuance. And in the consumer web area in particular, that nuance can count for everything, and it's unpredictable. And that's led to a model in the Valley where you see a lot of angel money being thrown at very early product ideas, not companies, but products, thrown into the market very cheaply, getting very, very broad distribution, getting customer feedback, and you build your products with your customers. Venture capital tends to come in later in a lot of those cases where we actually start to invest in the growth and acceleration of the business once it's proven. And for each one of the products, like an Instagram, that might grab the zeitgeist of the moment, there are 20 other photo enhancement applications which are just like it that fail. And that's not a trick. It's Darwinist capitalism at moving at light speed. And so I'll give you this framework to let you understand. Was introduced to me and came to me with an idea about business models and how ideas actually evolved into business models in the entrepreneurial cycle. And we had a great talk. And within about 10 minutes, we were in total disagreement. And he had a fairly linear approach about how he thought you put together a business plan, you basically executed against that plan, you delivered against that plan, and that plan became your model. And my life had been completely the opposite. My life had been one of trial and error until I got it right, constantly perfecting and measuring. And to John Mullen's credit, he came back to me and said, we should merge our ideas. Because at some point in the evolution of a real business, you've got to be able to harness all of these ideas into something that's executable. But at the entrepreneurial stage, in a place like Silicon Valley, you need something that's much more freewheeling. And so we wrote a book called Getting to Plan B. It was the second book. I wrote another book before that called The Monk and the Riddle, which actually was I'll take a bow on this, was chosen as one of the top 100 business books of all times. That book is about the heart and soul of entrepreneurship. Getting to Plan B is about the how of entrepreneurship. And in Getting to Plan B, we talk about a very different structure for how you build businesses. If you accept that most businesses fail, if you accept that most entrepreneurs coming into you with an idea, if they succeed, will end up succeeding with something other than that idea. If you accept that, then everything that we were doing, even in Silicon Valley, to build businesses was wrong. Because we would make them go through that static process. Come in with a business plan, and then I'll give you money against that plan. Now execute against that plan. What happens in that process is you end up telling white lies to each other until it breaks. They lie to you about the plan. You lie to them about your belief in the plan. They lie to you at every board meeting about how they're doing against the plan. You lie to them at every board meeting about how happy you are with how well they're doing against the plan. And then at some point they come in and go, guess what? It's actually not working. And now you sort of get rid of the management team. You bring in a new management team. That introduces a whole nother set of risks into the business that I hate to do if I don't have to. And that ends up with a lot of wasted entrepreneurial time and money. So John and I said, if the case is that most plan A's fail, and most successes are with some other plan, the metaphorical plan B. By the way, it could be C, D, E, F. It's the next plan. How would you do it differently? How would you not waste that entrepreneur's time? How would you fail forward? And so we broke it down into something extremely simple. We said every single one of these things doesn't start with a business plan, it starts with a business problem. What's the problem you're trying to solve? Focus on that. For every problem, you've got to have a unique solution. It has to be defensible. Why is your solution uniquely defensible, and how does it solve this problem? Really simple stuff. Then we go a little bit sideways. We say, look, how do we learn as quickly as possible from the marketplace? The first thing you can do, and most entrepreneurs don't do this. I'm shocked that they don't do this. The first thing you do is learn from everybody else's success and failures. And I'll tell you why entrepreneurs don't do this very badly. Most entrepreneurs walk in my office and they tell me they are doing something that is absolutely unique. It's never been done before. This is the most revolutionary idea ever. And if I just give them some money, they will change the world. And every time I look at those ideas, I see pieces of other ideas in them. Innovation is a process of synthesis. If we can break down that idea into its pieces, we can see who has come before us and see how they have fared. What did they learn? I'll give you an example. In the book, we talk about the iPod. As an aside, I've just invested in this great company here called Nest. They make a very smart thermostat. It is developed by the guy who developed the iPod. It wasn't Steve Jobs. So with the iPod, the question was, day one, could you in fact build a digital music player that people would listen to in a social environment with headphones and buy the digital music for? It was really the fundamental question. If you have that question, where do you look for the answers? Well, we thought about things like analogs and antilogs. The antilogs is a made-up name. The analogs are those things that have been done before that touch upon the problem that you're on, that give you an indication of whether you will succeed or fail. In the iPod, the obvious thing to do was look at the Walkman. How did the Walkman work? I mean, frankly, when Sony came out with the Walkman, I think they had a really, really big question to answer. Would people in social environments put headphones on and listen to music privately? That was a big deal. That question was, that had never been answered before because we never had a chance to ask that question before. But by the time that Steve started to commercialize the iPod, we didn't have to ask that question. We knew the answer. But it's important to know why we knew the answer, because you need to know what was different about then and now. Now, what about analogs? Analogs are things that people have done in the past that have failed, that you need to avoid. And in the case of the iPod, we know that it didn't work if you didn't load it with music. And we knew that if you didn't pay for the music, the labels were going to shut you down. Well, had somebody tried this before? Yeah. It had been tried before, and it had failed. It had failed numerous times. And the reason was nobody was paying for the music, they were stealing it. It was possible to look at those examples, those analogs, and understand what they did wrong. And as you can see, what Steve did is he went straight to the labels day one, gave them a new business model on his platform to get them to embrace his platform. So analogs and analogs are a way of cheap education. Accelerate your learning process by learning what came before and figure out where the distinctions are. And then what do? Well, then you're left with some critical questions that only you can answer. The ones that the analogs and analogs don't answer. These we call leaps of faith. These are the things that you have to focus in like a laser to succeed. These are the things that will determine your life or your death as an entrepreneur. Building out your business is irrelevant if you don't get the answers to those questions. And that starts the getting to Plan B process, which is to build a dashboard, not a business plan, but a dashboard where the primary driver is not your revenue number, but the questions you need to answer, your leaps of faith, with very clear metrics and very clear set of experiments you can run in the marketplace to get those answers as quickly and as cheaply as possible. And a wrong answer doesn't mean you're out of the game. Failure of an hypothesis is not failure of the enterprise. If you run it in a focused, efficient, economical way. So the idea was that if we could get entrepreneurs to embrace this, identify their leaps of faith, focus on them like a laser, economically and efficiently and quickly test them and measure, we could avoid years of investment of great entrepreneurs' time in bad ideas and lots of money being burned in the process. Frankly, I was a lot less worried about the money than I was worried about the entrepreneurial time. As you can see from the Valley right now, there's way too much money. But there's never too much entrepreneurial passion and vision. And to have that wasted for 2, 3 years, 4 years on the wrong project, that's unforgivable. So that's what the Getting to Plan B process is about. It applies to startups, but it applies to innovation everywhere. In the book, we have 30 examples, big companies, small companies, for-profits, not-for-profits, in the United States, outside the United States, all being able to use this innovation process to quickly move their companies to new ideas and embracing failure in the course. So that's what the Getting to Plan B process is. What I'd like to do really is, with the time we've got left, is have a dialogue to understand what your questions are. They can relate to anything I've talked about or nothing I've talked about. Happy to answer them. But I want to open it up. I want it up to you guys. It's your meeting, not mine. Yes?
How do the VCs accept the failure philosophy? Like, is it good to go in and say, oh, we've failed on all these things?
Some do, some don't. Frankly, when you look at a venture capitalist, you got to determine who you're going to work with. As individuals, I will tell you, frankly, I find that the young MBAs in this business don't embrace it. They don't get it. The people who have actually been entrepreneurs before, they get it. It's obvious to them. I would never take money from somebody who didn't have to make payroll. If you haven't made payroll, don't take their money. You're not going to be a great partner. Somebody who has actually been in your shoes. So I think that there are different kinds of venture capitalists, just like there are different kinds of entrepreneurs. You got to pick the one that works with you. Not all embrace this. One of the reasons we wrote Getting to Plan B was because we wanted to change the entrepreneurial mentality. Entrepreneurs get this. When I show this model to my scientist entrepreneurs, they go, yeah, of course. It's a scientific method. When I show it to an MBA, they go, oh, this is very scary. Well, guess what? That's the business you're in. So get out of the damn business. Go be a merchant banker. So this is changing the venture capital view of investing in innovation was part of the reason for writing the book. It's incomplete at best. Other questions? Other questions? Yes.
You seem to not like the traditional business plan. As an investor, I like it. Knowing what people are going to spend money on might be a crazy concept in the Valley. How do you suggest people get around that? I mean, you don't like business plans because you think they're inflexible.
Yeah.
I'm a fan of the rapidly evolving business plan.
Yeah.
It's still a plan you can measure against.
Yeah, the measure, so the reason I don't like business, first of all, every one of my companies has to start with a business plan. And it starts with a business plan because it's the lingua franca of the business. It's not because I believe the plan. I don't believe if believing the plan is the beginning.
Business plan to you is just a hurdle they've got to leap over in order to get your attention, and then you throw it away?
No, it's not a hurdle. It is a really important expression of the entrepreneur's understanding of the business environment in which they're going to be operating. That is not just a hurdle. Now, what's very interesting about the leap of faith process is John and I ran this to ground. Leaps of faith, I always try to limit it to 3-4 questions at most. If you're focusing on 10 questions, you're not focused. Those questions revolve, right? You answer a question about whether the technology will work, whether it will scale, whether or not people will pay a certain price for it. You answer that question, 3 more questions come up. What we found is as the company matured, as they answered their fundamental questions around product, around market, around pricing, around distribution, the next questions that came up were questions around revenue, gross margin, expenses, working capital. And when those questions were ripe and I answered them in a disciplined way, I had a business plan. But now it was a real business plan empirically fed by the market, not a made-up business plan based upon assumptions built before I had my first product or my first customer. Anybody who gives me a business plan before they got their first product or first customer and believe they're going to deliver on it, they're fooling themselves and they're fooling me.